Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, distinguished guests, we had two keynotes very much up to the topic of the mitigation of the climate change with the help of digital. We know that digital technologies have been either reshaping or even destroying, disrupting sector after sector on global economies. After disrupting or reshaping those sectors, the job markets have been reshaped. After reshaping those job markets, we have realized how many new skills we need in our societies. In parallel to that process, we all have witnessed also that digital has also a footprint, enormous footprint. We can calculate, based on different calculations right now, it's a 3+% of the global footprint. However, we recognize also the fact that it has a positive impact, at least 10+% in most of the efficiency gains we have reserved so far. In the same time, once again, digital has a footprint. And when we make a simple calculations on, for example, the streaming platforms or technology companies, what does it mean in the format of Scope 3 to have those emissions or the CO2 footprint mitigated? It may sound close to the 20% of the climate tax on the big corporates. However, there are also some companies who have not made at all what is possible from the technology perspective to streamline their efficiency, their internal server capacities, their networking capacities, and therefore, for example, the same social media platform TikTok has virtually per user session 4 times more capacities needed and also a CO2 emission therefore created compared to the similar platforms who have done it more efficiently. We have a number of topics to discuss today in the panel, and I'm most happy to invite to the stage 4 guests to share their stories, how digital has been helping them to meet the climate goals, or what have been or what is on the agenda currently when thinking about digital with the climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to call to the stage Dr. Emilia Stroimanova-Duh, Republic of Slovenia, the Minister of Digital Transformation, the Professor Deep Chana from NATO Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, please. Mark van Kopperolle, please, from Nokia, the Vice President from Government Affairs, and Irla Flynn, meeting once again here from Google, the Government Affairs for the Northern Europe. So, here we are, 4 different profiles, 4 different backgrounds, 4 different approaches, and I would really like to have with us an open discussion here, sharing your experience, your story, what can be learned from the story of your perspective on how digital is associated with the climate goals. Is there anything to learn and to share? Maybe we can start with you, please.
Thank you so much, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this really amazing event. So I will share the Slovenian story, of course. And as you mentioned, and as the keynote speakers mentioned as well, digital technologies can reduce global emissions. In a recent study done by the World Economic Forum, it was written that digital technologies can reduce the emissions up to 20%. By 2030. However, it really depends on us, how we're going to use the digital technologies. And this is the first thing what we're doing in Slovenia. When we are speaking about digital solutions, about digital technologies, we say both parts, the positive and the negative part. And I think this is very important to share with the citizens. So today, at the opening speech, the Estonian Prime Minister was speaking about three elements of digital transformation: openness, then it was the responsiveness and the resilience. And this is how our story will go. So in our case, at our government, we started with the openness. We wanted to share open data about how much digital technologies, what is the carbon footprint of the digital technologies. But as mentioned earlier, we wanted to share the positive things as well. So how we can reduce the printing. And we started sharing the data with everybody. So transparency is very important here, to share how much digital technologies can help us and what is the carbon footprint on the other side. So another thing what we are going to do is to share the carbon footprint of using the cloud. So we have a governmental cloud, and what we are doing at our ministry as well is to make sure that we don't just buy new equipment, but that we also repair equipment, and the one that is not used anymore, that it will be used maybe by somebody else that doesn't need, for example, a so fast computer or thing like that. So the next thing was the responsiveness. On one side, we are using digital technologies, of course, to reduce the emissions. So in the case of Slovenia, at our government, we have a recommendation that our employees, twice per week, they should work from home. So digital technologies are for sure enabling us to do that. For example, a month ago in Slovenia, we had a huge, devastating floods. So we were using digital technologies just to see what is happening. So we did the orthophoto imaging. We are now using also satellite imaging for disaster recovery and prevention. And on the other side, when we are speaking about responsiveness, we are using digital technologies to collect, to understand the public opinion on different topics, also when it comes to climate change, but also to raise the awareness on how important is climate change and how digital technologies can be used to make sure that we reach the climate goals. And last but not least, for us, is the resilience is very important. So we are building a new data center now, and you know that the data centers are the energy-hungry technologies. So what we are trying to do is to use natural resources. So we are going to cool the data center with the water. But we would even like to introduce circularity, which means that we would like to use the heat waste from the data center to heat the residential buildings in the surroundings. So in our case, in our story in Slovenia, we want to show both sides. We want to show how digital technologies are helping to meet the climate goals, but also what are the footprint by being very transparent and sharing the data also with the general public.
Thank you. It sounds, first of all, that one learning lesson for many of us is that actions speak louder than words. And instead of having long strategies, big visions, start acting now and start acting with small. And those small actions cumulatively create not only a socially vibrant and positive attitude, but also in the same time accumulatively contribute to the change. You are running the Ministry of Digital Transformation. We had a previous keynote from the Ministry of Environment. He said that he is the Minister for Digital. Can you also say that you are Minister for Environment?
No, because we have an excellent Minister for Environment, but we collaborate a lot together. And actually, today when I was considering that we need to make a mechanism in our country for e-waste, he was the first person in mind that I wanted to call and talk to him. So I think that the combination of us both will do the job.
Very good. Deep, from the very different angle. Not only collective defense forces, but also the defense industry in general. has been recognized as a resource-based sector globally, and now NATO and defense innovation. What do you see as angle for your story where there are meeting points between digital and climate change mitigation?
Thank you. Thanks for the question, and it's a real honor to be here today as well, to talk to you all. I don't know how many of the 5 minutes I'll take, but I'll try and address the question as best I can. The first thing I would say, just an observation from my point, and that is that this idea of digital technologies as a phrase is a convenient thing for us to be able to talk generally about a lot of things, but it's a fairly fuzzy thing too, okay? I'm not entirely sure where digital technology stops and technologies start and what the difference is between the two. Effectively, what we do when we talk about digital technologies is we're talking about our ability to take signals in the world, turn them into ones and zeros, compute on them somehow, and then use those computers to take physical actions in the world. That's how I view it, right? So basically what's happened is as human beings, we have built a cyber physical system where our machines can talk this language, and this is very powerful. That digital language is very, very powerful. And I guess what I'm trying to drive at when I push this perspective forward to you is that digital systems, this language of ones and zeros, whatever you want to call it, it's pervasive across nearly every single modern technology that we're talking about, right? When we talk about how we operate in the world and how we shape the society around us with our technologies. So how can these technologies help us with something like climate change, and where is the coherence with something like defense and security? So my story starts maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I was asked to chair, I was a professor at Imperial College London at the time, I was asked to chair a group for NATO looking at how technologies were being very disruptive and how NATO and defense and security could keep pace with this very rapidly evolving technology space, with all the other digital aspects moving very quickly like machine learning and all of these other things. And it was interesting to undertake this exercise. It took us a few years, a group of us. And one of the things we noted in this exercise is that when you start looking at the security and defense problems of the future, or even the ones that we're facing today, what we can see is that our technology systems, our digital systems that speak this language of ones and zeros, is extremely interconnecting. There's a global interconnected network, of course, right? It means that we are much, much closer together than we were before. This means that the ramifications and the impacts of local security and defense and conflict events, we can no longer localize them as much as we used to be able to, right? So in fact, when we look at something which yesterday we would have thought to be a local conflict, it can very, very quickly become a global phenomena. And we're starting to witness that with some of the events that we are all very aware of, the war in Ukraine, but also things like the COVID crisis. These things became global very quickly, in part because of information systems, disinformation, the propagation of the problem physically, all of these different factors come into play. And so what you can see is that when you think about defense and security, we have to be able to use technology to bring down the probability of those kind of events, those conflict scenarios, as well as address the issues when the conflict is happening, right? Because if we don't focus on bringing down the probability in the first place, it's very likely that the impacts of future events will not be able to control them once they're actually in play. It will not be good enough to be reactive, is what I'm trying to say. So bringing it round to climate change, one of the principal drivers for insecurity and conflict in the future is going to be the state of our climate. It is going to drive us into positions of food insecurity, of water insecurity. It is going to force migratory patterns and movements of people around the world. It is going to mean that because of the technologies, the digital technologies and information systems we have, a problem in the climate which manifests itself somewhere halfway across the world will very quickly be transmitted to the other side of the world, whereas maybe 50 years ago, it could be isolated as a story that's happening over there. So on every single level, we have to be very conscious about how we can use these systems and technologies to help us bring down the likelihood of those things happening. And there are a number of different ways that we might be able to do that, through efficiencies, through better use of situational awareness with detection, through a whole sort of panoply of different measures. I won't go into that now. I think my 5 minutes are up, and we can maybe take that on in the discussion.
Thank you so much. What is your takeaway from working both in academic field but also working so closely with the defense field? There is a common understanding that there are quick cycle sectors which can adopt very quickly a new technological paradigms into their core processes.
Yep.
And there are slow sectors.
Yep.
Among them, for example, healthcare is recognized as one of the slowest sector to adopt new technologies. Education, by the way. But when we are talking about defense, then it's something which is called disconnected or never connected to the digital technologies. Do you see that there is a learning lesson from innovation in the defense industry to be shared with other sectors of the so-called slow cycle, where they could learn or where there is a mutual learning space for implementing or bringing digital technologies or new innovations closer to the practice?
Yep, very short answer to that, and that's what we're trying to do with Diana and the Defence Innovation Accelerator. Yeah, and also coupled with that, the NATO Innovation Fund, which is a venture capital fund designed to accelerate technologies. What we are principally trying to do is to fund and to support the next generation of breakthrough technologies, which can address this wide, broad problem set that I've just talked about. But at the same time, we're also using this as a convening center where we can bring together industry, government, and academia, so-called sort of triple helix entities, so they can work more closely together, understand each other better, and possibly even move at greater pace, because really we need to be more agile, particularly in the defense and security space.
Is climate change related insecurities on the radar of Diana?
Yes. Very much so, and I think you'll also see that it's on the radar of an organization like NATO. Actually, I mean, the strategy papers that NATO has published on climate change pretty much talk about these kind of things. If you also think about the coherence that an organization like NATO has to have to the Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations missions, you know, these two things are two sides of the same coin. If we solve those big problems, we have a more secure, sustainable future, and we avoid getting into the situations where none of us want to be, right? Which is in the heart of conflict and warfare. Once you do get into that situation, however, you also need the tools and systems to quickly resolve them and get out. And that in itself is also protective of the environment, if you like, if you can achieve that.
Thank you. Mark, we are moving now closer to the core of the networks with the Nokia, one of the most prominent and influential suppliers of those core technologies. We are relying right now on using and utilizing our next generation and next after that generation digital networks. How do you see the ever-growing and accelerating demand for the bandwidth and access to the network being sound with environmental footprint of the digital technologies? And what is a takeaway from Nokia? What is the story of Nokia currently?
Thank you, and thank you for being on this panel. I think, obviously, the topic is absolutely critical. You know, I wanted to start by saying that climate change is actually moving much faster than we are. And if you look at the latest statistics, actually, you know, we are today already at 1.1 degree above pre-industrial levels, which, you know, the Paris Agreement was putting 1.5 degrees. And if we continue like we do, we will reach 3.2 degrees at the end of the century. So just to say that there is absolute requirement for all of us to do a lot about this, to accelerate the pace of actions. And obviously, as Nokia, we are doing our bit. There are actually a number of things that I would like to highlight. And our strategy is actually focused around two things. It's maximizing the handprint. And you already mentioned that digital technologies can help other sectors to decarbonize. And obviously, I can give you some interesting examples here, and we should all be able to learn from that. And then the second point is obviously minimizing our footprint. We are a company that provides a lot of technologies, a lot of digital technologies that are obviously using energy. And what we need to do is make sure that, you know, these technologies going forward by design are becoming far more energy efficient. So just perhaps on the first bit related to the handprint, because I think Minister already mentioned that digital technologies are a very important lever in order to reduce carbonization, and so a lever to decarbonize. If you look, for instance, at two important sectors like the energy and manufacturing, actually energy is the one that would benefit the most from digitalization in order to lower the green gas house emissions. Manufacturing is also an important sector, and obviously the others as well, but energy and manufacturing are actually at the top. And there, you can have a lot of things. I mean, you look in the energy sector, making sure that the grid is being digitalized, by making sure that you have this technologies like solar panels, like wind energy. So all this put into the grid, alongside, using batteries from cars at home or batteries that you have at home as well, or even batteries, for instance, from mobile base stations. That all those things are connected to the grid. Digitalization can ensure that the grid becomes far more resilient, and then obviously able to provide, much cleaner energy to the users of it. So in fact, it's a double dividend. You have obviously more clean energy into the grid, and on the other hand, that clean energy is being used by other sectors. To come to what we are doing from an ICT perspective. So as I mentioned, we are making gear that consumes energy, and obviously, our customers are using that gear. So if you look at a statistic here as well, that is quite interesting. Actually, what we saw is that, let me just find it here. So in 2022, we had around 95% of Nokia's greenhouse gas emissions that came from the use of our products by our customers, rather than through our own operations. So really showing that this is a big part of the Scope 3 emissions. And so what's important for Nokia is to make sure that going forward, we can actually, decouple the data growth from the energy consumption of the products. And just to give you a few examples, by integrating the newest generation of chips, we can actually reduce the energy consumption of the products by more than 40 to 50%, in some cases by 75%. And another, I think, interesting use case that we can bring is liquid cooling. I mean, obviously, and you talked about the data centers, these are consuming a huge amount of energy. Products like, base stations for mobile radio also consume a lot of energy. And if you move from fan, so air-cooled system, to a liquid-cooled system, you can actually reduce also the energy by a huge amount. And so these kind of technologies are, the technologies that we want to put on the market. So on the one hand, making sure that we can maximize the handprint of digital technologies towards other sectors, as well as minimize the footprint of the ICT products themselves.
Thank you so much. We all know that there is a human right to use any streaming platform or social media platform for any human being on the planet Earth. And my God, we have almost 4 billion people using it on a daily basis. Out of the 95% of the so-called CO2 footprint of the technologies your customers are using, have you made any estimations? How big is a share of the entertainment and social media from the proportion of that 95%? We know that government can do whatever they want, print less, but that's a fraction of the digital footprint on a global scale. Do we see any statistics also on the user side of the digital footprint currently?
So I don't have those figures, but obviously, the telecom operators and others that are using our equipment probably have those statistics. I think what's important to know is that, especially, base stations and the data centers that you mentioned are consuming huge amounts of energy. So obviously, data centers are being used to store all these streaming services that you were mentioning. So this is something really to be looked at in detail as well.
Super. Irla, 25 years of Google. Do we know? It sounds like Google was here only yesterday, but it has been actually already a kind of dinosaur of the digital technologies. Well, only one company you can remember being older, or two companies, Microsoft and Apple perhaps. And then suddenly Google, and now 25 years already, most dominant player ever in digital sphere. And what is your view on addressing the climate change as a most dominant player, I would say, in the digital ecosystem on a global scale?
Thank you, Linar. We prefer to be described as popular rather than the word you use. But anyway, thank you. It's a good intro. I mean, look, first of all, I agree with the framing you made and the minister made that digital could actually make a significant net positive contribution to the whole area of sustainability. We do need to look and continually work, as you've raised, across the entirety of the digital value chain, infrastructure, cables, devices, networks, and so on. But there's been some good analysis on that the potential for a positive impact is very significant. If I could talk about Google, our approach, and we've been very focused on sustainability for quite a chunk of that 25 years, is number one, to run our own operations in a sustainable manner. Number two is to empower the people that use our tools to make choices that can be more sustainable. And the third thing is to partner with governments and large companies to try to get a positive impact at scale. There have been quite a few comments on data centers, and we have a fleet of very large data centers in Europe and around the world. They are very significant facilities. They are consuming a lot of electricity. We've been very, very focused on energy and efficiency and sustainability in the data centers, and also empowering them by renewable energy. So now, and for the last few years, we've been powering all our data centers and offices 100% renewable, average over the course of a year, right? Not every day, but average over the course of a year. What we want to do is get that to every day, and that's the big target we've set ourselves by 2030. There's a lot in that, but that's where we want to get to. The other thing I'll say is that AI, machine learning, playing a very significant role already. And this is a great example of where this powerful new computing technology can really make a difference. And I think, Linar, you were looking for some examples, so if I can throw out maybe one or two. The minister talked about floods, which indeed is a very serious and growing problem. Just at the end of last year, we launched a new tool called Flood Hub. And what this is, essentially, I don't know if anybody has seen Flood Hub or heard about it. Audience, hands up? No? Nobody? Okay. One, the most important person. So what Flood Hub does is it basically mapping the water levels in rivers all around Europe and around the world, and it's making a projection about a week ahead. And what it's taking essentially is publicly available data from typically government authorities or utilities, applying various machine learning algorithms to that to make a projection forward a week. And obviously in cases where there's a risk or danger level coming into play, we hope that can be useful data for governments and civic authorities to start planning and thinking about what they're going to do. So that's Flood Hub. Let me give a second example if I can, which is on Google Maps. Has anybody ever used Google Maps? Mm-hmm. Okay, a few more hands there. Well, if you use Google Maps, you can get directions from A to B. driving, and you know that if you get directions for driving, sometimes it will give you different options. And I think we introduced at the end of 2021 is what we call eco-friendly routing. And if you look at Google Maps, you'll see that it is suggesting which is the most energy efficient of the choices that you're offering. So for example, earlier I looked at directions to the airport. Turns out there are 3 different routes through the city to the airport. And one of those was, according to Google Maps, 5%, using 5% less fuel. Took about the same amount of time as the others. So this is intended as just a simple, very user-friendly piece of information, kind of nudge that can help people drive in a more sustainable fashion and, as it turns out, save money. So in the first year that was in operation, it seems to have pretty good adoption, and we estimate the choices that people made to consume less fuels is sort of equivalent to taking 100,000 cars, petrol cars off the road. So pretty good, significant impact. And again, that's a combination of data about traffic and driving routes, again with machine learning, which is extrapolating likely traffic, fuel consumption, and so on. So I suppose those are 2 examples, I think, that show that with some imagination, we can develop tools that can be very useful for people. Plenty of other examples I'm happy to talk about, but maybe that's good for now.
Thank you so much. Let me address one thing immediately, environmental responsibility that Google has been championing in a number of regions and countries. Do you feel that it has been rewarded by governments, by regulators, by your users, the wider audience? Have people ever recognized that Google has an environmental policy which aims to be a potential with a positive impact to the environment? What is your public image? Is it at all associatable with an environment, climate change?
I think we get some positive feedback, but I think, frankly, often people don't understand how it all works, if you like. And I think for the average person, for example, will not understand, even what a data center is or how it works. And we see, all around Europe, actually growing resistance to the building of data centers. What are they doing? They're just guzzling all our electricity. And so there's, I think, a big job for all of us to try and make a positive case. This is part of the essential infrastructure for the digital tools and services that you want to use. And if we build them right and operate them well, at a large scale, they can also be much more sustainable than other computing options. So I think there's a lot of work to do there to make a positive case. The other thing I'd say, Linar, is that I'm in Google quite a long time, a good chunk of those 25 years, and this has been also something that's been a priority and a value of the people that started the company. So I think, not to be corny, I think it's a thing that people in Google wanted to do, which is we believe we can digitize, provide information, but we can also do that in a sustainable fashion. So I think there is also just a level of commitment inside the organization to do it. But actually, it's not something that's imposing a significant cost. By actually going with renewables and energy efficiency, you're saving yourself money. So it also kind of makes business sense as well. So there's I suppose, a variety of factors driving, what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the topics which has been re-articulated by all the panelists has been the communication awareness about the potential positive impact of digital technologies, and in the same time also the digital technologies have its own environmental footprint, but let's focus maybe with a magic wand session now to how to make sure that all the decision makers, including the audience here, would be better equipped with not only awareness but also practices on the positive impact of digital technologies to the climate change. What would be your quick recommendations to the audience, how to make sure that not only awareness is with governments, but also the practice that will follow? Can you share what other governments could do in order to start and to make sure that the positive impact is understood and then also executed?
So I love data. And I think data is the solution. And we saw that from Google, to be sincere. You are measuring the carbon footprint of storing the data on the cloud, and this is what we want to do as well. But by showing how much carbon footprint you're doing with your action, with clear data, then you know what is happening there. Just speaking about digital technologies can help us mitigate the climate issues and so on, it won't help. But if you have clear data and you know what are the consequences of your actions, then you will start reconsidering your actions as well. For example, instead of sending attachments of 10 megabytes to all your company employees, and you know how much space it takes somewhere and that there is a carbon footprint connected to that, then you will start considering your actions, just to make things very tangible.
Other comments?
Yeah, I can maybe jump in a little bit. I think, just to zoom out again a little bit, look, there's tons of stuff you can do, right? And of course, generative approaches in machine learning are going to mean we'll design better chips. We're going to have more efficient code in the future. We might even be able to do some interesting, nice things on the physics in terms of controlling heat dissipation in data centers and think about more efficient ways of locating these things. But we dance around a little bit some of the core issues when we start doing too much of that. A large percentage of the population is yet to join the internet and become digital, as we are right here, right now. The ramifications of that have to be gamed out. It is for our governments and our policymakers to make those calculations now, because they can be made. You can multiply Estonia, for example, over the several billion population of the Earth and then decide what's that energy footprint going to look like then if everybody is streaming whatever they're streaming and sending pictures to whatever they're sending. You can figure out how many of these things are going to need to be manufactured and how much of the raw material has to be taken out of the ground and what kind of impact that's going to have. And then you can ask yourself, is that something that is manageable right now, or is that going to drive us straight into a crisis scenario or not? And that's a simple sort of question that needs to be asked. I can tell you that some of the answers to those questions are not very comfortable, having extrapolated some of them myself. And one of the things that we've talked about here, which has been a hidden discussion, is energy. It all boils down effectively to this, right? Is that you need energy to do this stuff. You can either make it very efficient, you can make your systems very efficient, and they can reduce energy in their use, but you then also have to make sure that there is adequate provision of energy, and that that energy is available at a cost point which is not damaging both from a sort of financial perspective, but then also from a climate impact perspective, so that you're not driving yourself into a massive climate crisis by all of this footprint. And I would say that this is the thing that I think decision makers need to grapple with right now, is that extrapolation, and probably also have a better understanding, the technical literacy of exactly what is possible today, and how that might end up manifesting itself in the next few decades if we just copy and repeat everything that we have now. I would argue that that is not a sustainable plan for the planet. And that is the reason why there is an urgency to do something about it. And as my friend here just pointed out, the temperature's gone up, not down. We're not solving this problem.
We're heating it up.
We're actually not solving it. We've been talking about it for a couple of decades. It's been getting hotter, and it's not being solved. So it only goes one way after that, right? And so this is the reason why we need urgency, agility, and everything else.
So how to build that urgency? What's your takeaway from the
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot, and it has been said, but you know, a lot is about collaboration. I mean, public-private partnerships, I mean, data sharing, absolutely critical. I mean, you know, when you digitalize sectors, you have, you know, the digital industry talking to a sector, they don't talk the same language. So meaning that the interfaces of the products, of the systems that need to interact with each other, do not talk to each other. So you need to work on standardization. You need to work on data sharing. You need to get all these things right. And that requires, you know, collaboration, requires digital skills, because, you know, you need to be able to talk the same language between different sectors.
And if I may, this federation point you're making is vital. Someone has to compel it that way, because fragmentation creates even greater inefficiency, right?
So you need to have the governments talk together, the digital government together with, you know, Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Energy, together with the private sector, put all these things together, work on use cases together, and then share. And I think it requires a lot of urgency to do that. But as we said, look at the temperature that's rising. If we continue that way, 3.2 degrees by the end of the century.
Yeah, I think at one level we all have a responsibility to make the case. In this case, it's particularly make the case for digital tools and platforms as things that can save people time and money, like get you to the airport and 5% less petrol, but also more fundamentally at the system level, the fundamental enablers of the change. So there is a sales job for us all to do. I think secondly, a practical problem that industry faces is getting new renewable energy projects built and plugged into grids. We want to do that. We are doing that at a significant scale, but I'm afraid across Europe we have a very patchy experience. It is very difficult. You run into a lot of local resistance, and yes, there's sensitivities around that. But that remains rather difficult, and is slowing down the scale of investment that I think we would all agree we need to see. So that's something that industry and government really need to work together on. And thirdly, maybe is a policy framework, and this is, I suppose, particularly where the EU framework comes in. Clarity, simplicity, predictability. These are things that help industry map a path forward. And I totally agree with Mark too around the idea of partnerships. We're in this together. Government can play a tremendous enabling role, bringing people together, connecting data, conversations, solutions, and so on. So I think I would have a pretty optimistic sense about things, but also a lot of work for us all to do.
Thank you. The flow here, I can witness, was data forecasting, collaboration, policy frameworks, everything which is very clear and understandable, and yet in the same time, many of the regulators around the world say that only thing that works really is tax. Well, was it tax and death, which are something you can't escape? And well, if we want to escape the death of planet Earth, let's start taxing. I agree very much also with the fact that everything related to the climate change is highly intellectually demanding exercise. Data and CO2 tons and emissions and 1 megabyte versus something, and money matters. To conclude that session, let me take a last exercise. Do you think we will see in Europe, at least in Europe, who has been in some cases a kind of policy and framework, standard-setting region on the planet Earth, do we see an enforcement on the climate tax on digital companies in 2 years' time?
No.
No?
In 2 years' time.
No? In 5 years' time. Okay, let's put it. In 5 years, we will have in Europe an environmental tax which is also imposed on ICT and digital ecosystems.
I can quickly comment. I really don't know. I've spent a bit of time working in the Commission and in the EU, and I know these things take a long time, sometimes justly so, and sometimes not so justly so. And I think if you were trying to paraphrase or quote Marvin Gaye, it was taxes, death, and trouble that are the guaranteed things in life. But yes, okay, taxation has got to be one lever. But I don't think you're going to achieve too much just by taking punitive measures and forcing people to do that. This has to be mission-orientated stuff. There has to be a co-alignment of interests, of positive interests for corporates, for governments, for citizens, for academics, to be able to walk in one way. And I would just say this, that it's up to us to choose what to do with the technology. The digital technology, by the way, has the ability to make things a lot worse and also a lot better. And the people who are in control, or the entities in the universe that are in control of that decision, is us. So we have agency here, right? But it's very clear that the technology, you don't just let it go and it solves the problem. We have to direct it in a certain way. And I think co-aligned interest is the only way that we're going to be able to achieve that, with maybe some taxation along the way. But I don't work there, so I'm not going to comment any further.
Do we have a common agreement with a deep approach, please.
If I may add, one thing that's absolutely critical for Europe is, policymakers should officially recognize the enabling effect of digitalization and connectivity to reduce environmental footprint. If you look today at the EU taxonomy, digital solutions are not in there. So that's a first step to make sure that we can channelize investments and also incentives towards digital technologies for decarbonizing. So
very
that's,
strong statement. Earl, your
Well, we should have asked Mr. Breton this morning, because he could give us a stronger answer on what's coming. I think there is a body of regulation coming through, standards and so on around data centers and digital tools. So that is coming. I think tax is not in the mix. Maybe it'll happen. I won't give you a prediction, but I would say that from the industry point of view, there's a lot of self-motivation. There are very good economic, branding and values reasons for doing these things, and I think you can point to many examples across the industry of good action, but yeah, a lot more to do.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our panel discussion here, followed by the keynote speaks. Let me conclude by recognizing the fact that we all commonly agree that there is a positive digital impact for the climate change, positive impact, and that needs no longer just words, but more action, collaboration, data sharing to be used for the forecasting and also for the policy frameworks. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and let me hand over the floor to our host of the day, Sandra, please. Thank you once again.